screen कर दे एक बार.
Besides with your blessings that our university has flourished in these 12 years, and we have a special message for you also on our silver anniversary.
सामने लगा दो कैमरा नीचे में. इधर ही बोलेंगे ना बैठ के.
Namaste, good morning. Respected guests, dignitaries, our chief guests. To invoke the Almighty, we request our esteemed chief guests and dignitaries and members of the management to please light the lamp of knowledge to symbolize prosperity and life.
वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा. वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा. वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं
Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen.
महाकाय सूर्य
When the side is sitting.
To help us all embrace life and be seekers of truth in our domain, we are honored to welcome a great torchbearer of knowledge and wisdom, a prolific speaker and an insightful commentator on the world around us, a leader who says, India matters to me and I would like to matter to India. Ladies and gentlemen, let us extend a warm welcome to the wonderfully erudite, witty and wise parliamentarian who we are all eagerly waiting to meet, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. An author, politician and former international diplomat, Dr. Shashi Tharoor straddles several worlds of experience. At present a fourth-term member of parliament, he represents the parliamentary constituency of Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, in the Lok Sabha. A proud member of the Indian National Congress, he has served as a Minister of State for External Affairs and Minister of State for Human Resource Development in the Government of India during the second term of the United Progressive Alliance. At present the chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, he has previously chaired the Parliamentary Standing Committees on External Affairs, Information Technology and Chemicals and Fertilizers. Before joining Indian politics, Dr. Tharoor worked for nearly 3 decades at the United Nations, serving as a peacekeeper, refugee worker and administrator at the highest levels, including as Under Secretary General. Dr. Tharoor is also an award-winning, internationally best-selling author of over 25 books. He has won a score of prestigious literary honors, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award and the Sahitya Academy Award. The list of Dr. Tharoor's literary and academic achievements is amazing, honoring his plethora of talents and charismatic leadership. The World Economic Forum named him a global leader of tomorrow, and that surely deserves a round of applause. Dr. Tharoor was hailed by NDTV as the New Age Politician of the Year, and he has spent the greatest part of his literary and public life articulating, defending, and championing the idea of India anchored in our Constitution that the INC embodies. At present, he is a full-time member of the Congress Working Committee. I request our Managing Director of the GD Goenka Group, Mr. Goenka, to welcome Dr. Shashi Tharoor with a small token of our love and appreciation. We are so honored that Sir has given us this opportunity to meet him and hear his golden words of wit and wisdom. And I invite our MD Sir, Mr. Nipun Goenka, and our Executive Director of the GD Goenka Group, Ms. Radhika Goenka, to have a wonderful conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you. Good to be with you all. It's wonderful seeing the slides of the moment when we launched this university. It's so good to be reminded of that. But you're right. I'm afraid the years have not been very kind to me.
So I think most of us sitting here, we are principals and teachers of all our K-12 schools. So the first question that I would want to ask you is, what would be the top priorities for India's next phase into the development of the education?
Well, I've been arguing this for some time, so in a sense it's not a new answer. But what we really need is to encourage much more out-of-the-box thinking amongst our students. This is, of course, a 21st century requirement, but in my view, it was the old methods of pedagogy in India were already out of date when I was in school. That is, this whole business of rote learning, cramming textbooks, memorizing things, and regurgitating them in the examination hall. It's understandable that in our country we have a strongly exam-oriented culture. When you have so many students, such a large population, exams become the only effective means of differentiating among students. But the skills that we were teaching children in that process are skills that, as I said, were already beginning to be out of date, because ultimately the ability to memorize and regurgitate information is actually the least important skill required in the world of today, and certainly ever since the internet came into being. Because if you can get the information that you are struggling to recall with 2 clicks of a mouse or 1 glance at a mobile phone, then what price your education? What is the value of the fact that you learn things by heart? Yes, I could recite large chunks of Shakespeare. I could recite a lot of historical dates and events from memory. I could, at one time anyway, recite mathematical formulae. But today, a child, I think, can easily, even with just remembering 1 word, 1 phrase, 1 approximate bit of information, find that. Now with AI powering search, it's become even easier. You remember very little of something and yet you can find it within seconds. And therefore, what does education need to do? And I've been saying this for some time, as I said, so it's not a new insight. I've been saying to teachers, please don't teach the children what to think, teach them how to think. This is the most important thing that's required. In our time, it has been for a generation at least, and it certainly is for the world today. And let me explain why 2 more minutes. First of all, of course, is the undoubted fact that, as I said earlier, what to think becomes out of date very quickly and becomes a skill that is very easily found in the hands of everybody with a mobile phone. So that's something which is essentially no longer a priority. Whatever facts, whatever data, whatever information, whatever stuff you need, quotations, etc., you can get. So then the second thing is, what else should a child know? Yes, the basics everyone should know. But the habits that you all as teachers must inculcate is the habit of understanding. How do you do that? By teaching things in a way that get the child to question. It is by questioning that the child evolves. So unfortunately, there was a generation of teachers that had no patience with stupid questions. I encourage you all to be different. Welcome questions, however stupid. Why can't the sun rise in the west? Answer that to them to the best of your explanation ability. But let them ask everything. Let them question the basics. Let them understand. Because it is only by questioning the basic facts we all taught them that they understand which things are capable of changing innovation. Imagine somebody teaching about the internal combustion engine 20 years ago, and just explaining the only way a car can run is by burning fuel, and that fuel powers the motor, who drives the car, the wheels turn, the car moves, right? If a child kept asking, but why? Why can't we find some other way of moving it? Most teachers have said, stop being stupid, this is the earliest bug this up in the textbook and write, this is what you need to know. But somebody clearly thought beyond the internal combustion engine and came up with the battery operated car, right? Similarly, until very recently, we all assumed that to drive a car or a vehicle of any sort, you need a human being. Now somebody has thought outside the box and figured out a way of creating a driverless vehicle. So there are always things you can read. There are some things that cannot be changed. You cannot change where the sun rises from the point of view of the earth. You cannot change where it sets, etc., etc. So those are things which, to be honest, you can explain patiently to a child once, twice, thrice, and they won't understand this and eventually be able to figure it out themselves. But explaining the whys are the way in which you will think. Something, for example, that I'm disappointed we don't do enough in our classrooms, but I was lucky enough to have teachers who were enterprising enough to do this, is to get the children to explain an issue and debate it in the classroom. This started, I remember in my school one day when a teacher was ill, and the substitute teacher didn't know the subject so well, so he basically got one of the brightest students, I think it happened to be me, to teach a particular lesson that I had read out, and then to get children to question and so on, and we had a discussion. This kind of thing, getting children to synthesize information, to process it in their own brains and present it, this is how people learn how to think. Why is it that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and so on, when asked what do you look for in a person you're going to hire, they always said out of the box. Okay, the box is that conventional place where everybody already is. The people who are going to succeed in today's world are the ones who will be outside their box, will find new ways of approaching problems. And because we have this exam culture, and everybody is mugging up for the exams from textbooks that may have been out of date the day they were printed, that's not good enough anymore. Because the real exam called life asks you questions for which you cannot find the answers in a textbook. And those questions very often involve unfamiliar information that you have to make sense of and figure out a path to applying in your job, in your workplace, whatever. There was a study by the Oxford Martin School already now 3-4 years ago that said that 30% of the jobs in the world by 2030 will be jobs that don't exist today. Today was 4 years ago. So let's assume it was 2020 they wrote that report. And they say by 2030, 30% of the jobs will be jobs that don't exist today. How does a teacher teach a child to prepare for a job that doesn't exist? It's not possible. All you can do is equip them to have the habits of mind, the flexibility, the way of thinking and reasoning that will get them to be able to rapidly master the attributes required for that job when it comes into being. And by the way, some of that predictions already come true. Right? When that prediction was made, AI was not as far advanced as it is today. Think of the jobs that AI has created. So already be prepared for a world in which change is not just the only constant which is a cliche, but change is also moving at a far more rapid pace than ever before.
So you had a long serving in the UN. What are some of the lessons you learned which our principles can apply in today's world from your stint at the UN?
Well, I mean, the UN in some ways is a wonderful embodiment of diversity. And in a multi-ethnic, multi-lingual, multi-religious country like ours, learning how to live with and embrace diversity is actually a great attribute. You know, we had people from 193 countries working in the UN, and we very rapidly began to forget which country they came from and recognize them by their individual qualities. It was no longer this person is Japanese or that one is Slovenian or whatever. It was about that person understands the history of South Africa than anybody else would do to them in this particular part. That person has mastered the principles of peacekeeping, logistics, whatever. It's individual qualities and strengths. And to my mind, in a society like ours, this is the most essential skill and attribute. Sorry, I thought I'd turn the sound off and I obviously have. The most essential skill and attribute that we need is to be able in our country to see people beyond the identity labels that sadly politicians tend to dwell on. There's nothing, seems to me, worse for our country than identifying people by their religion, by their caste, by their state of origin, their language, their color of skin. See them by the content of their character, by the skill set they bring, by the knowledge they have, by the experience they're able to contribute. Those are the qualities we need to inculcate in our children from a very young age, to judge people by those substantive things and not by things that they couldn't help that they were born into. Lots of other things that you have too about diplomacy and cooperation and working across international boundaries, but those are perhaps less significant. I don't know how many of you have large numbers of international students, but even if you do, the principle I articulated for within our country also applies to the rest of the world. So that would be the one big takeaway I think.
You've already shared a little glimpse of your childhood where you went into the class for substitution, but what other things do you think contributed significantly to making you the person you are today during your schooling years?
You know, the truth is that I was unfortunately an asthmatic child. And to point to illness, which is also something you can't help, as an attribute of character building may seem a bit bizarre, but in fact it was rather relevant. I was born in London, my father was working there, and came back to India at the age of 2.5. The moment we came back, something in my system reacted very badly. And it was pre-Delhi pollution, by the way, so it wasn't Delhi, it was actually Bombay. But I ended up with very severe asthma. And those were the days before bronchodilators and inhalers and nebulizers and all those conveniences we have today. Those were the days when basically, even for children, they would just give you a very strong pill that made your heart beat like a percussion drum and kept you awake. And you would sit up propped up with pillows in your bed, unable to sleep, unable to lie down, unable to breathe properly. What do you do? I mean, and of course, those were the days before any television existed. Certainly Nintendo and PlayStation working with demon and inventor's eye. No one ever dreamt of mobile phones or laptops. So basically, when you're sitting there, unable to do anything else, it's the one part of you that's awake and flourishing is your brain. And I started reading. I became a rather precocious reader. I started, when I was really small, my parents read to me, but then very small, at 2.5, 3, I was picking up books and reading them myself. And I read widely, indiscriminately, and precociously, but in the process, books became my entertainment, my escape from my illness, and my education. And so the result was that a lot of what shaped me in terms of my sort of knowledge, experience, vocabulary, all those things that we talk about, all of that comes from those early years of extensive forced reading that was literally nothing else I could do. The second thing I think it did was character building, in the sense that for the longest time in my childhood, until more modern medication got invented, I would be sort of struggling, I mean, going to school, writing examinations while struggling to breathe. And believe me, that had miraculous effect in my powers of concentration, on my self-discipline, on my ability to do certain things that were necessary to excel despite that handicap and so on. So I never became the great athlete that I might have wanted to be, or the great cricket player that I fantasized about. But I did become good at reading and studying and taking exams, meeting deadlines, and fulfilling a prodigious amount of work, doing my homework on time, in fact rather rapidly. And I would often joke in words that sadly I didn't come up with. These are words of an American humorist from the 1940s, but it was very true of me too. That I write faster than anybody who writes better, and I write better than anybody who writes faster. And that remains the truth of me.
So there's no other way. You have to do the hard work, you have to do the reading to get it.
Oh yeah. No, that's absolutely indispensable. I always believe there is no substitute for hard work. God may bless you with talents, with brains, with whatever else. In fact, I think everyone in this room is blessed in their own way. But what should make of it is entirely up to your own effort. And that's why, again, when I'm asked by principals to address graduating classes or whatever and give them one simple message, the message I always tell them, and it seems very simple, but it's actually, I mean it from the bottom of my heart, is be the best you that you can be. And what do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, at a young age, start discovering who you are. Know yourself. I think that's a very simple principle, but it's so essential and very often overlooked. Know yourself in the sense that understand your strengths, your limitations, your needs, your weaknesses, your passions, what you care about, what motivates you. These are things only you can know to yourself. Some of these things you may not even want to admit to the public or to the outside world or to your family. But know yourself. And once you know yourself, be the best you that you can be. And by that I mean, if you know your certain strengths, work on them, make them better, polish them to a fine art, and develop them, deploy them. If you know your certain limitations, and you find out by trying, by the way, you think you can sing and you work, you realize, having heard a recording of you and seeing people wincing and grimacing as they hear you sing, and you don't know how to sing, either you have enough basics that you can go and get trained, or you can say, this is not me, let me not do what I can't do. Not everyone can win the 100-meter dash, no, not everyone can act beautifully in a play, not everyone can do the Bharatanatyam. But absolutely for young people in particular, try, learn, experiment, find out what you're good at. But whatever you are, once you know it, don't let yourself down. Because ultimately, life is not, in my view, about competing with anyone else. Fortunately, unlike many Indians, I was born without an NVG. I have never resented anybody else's successes. I've celebrated other successes, and I've always felt secure enough to believe that the world has enough possibilities for every one of us to succeed in our own light. And that is by succeeding against the yardstick we know we can tell ourselves that we could have done better. So it is not about saying, I couldn't do this or I couldn't achieve that. It's about saying, I didn't try hard enough, or if I had done this, which I know I could have done, I would have succeeded. That way, you set your standards of excellence in life against yourself, not against anyone else. And to my mind, if you do that right, you do it sincerely, and you do it with commitment to yourself, ultimately you will succeed, and the rest of the world will take care of it.
You mentioned books. Are there any books you recommend on leadership, and especially for educational leaders, in plain English, not your...
To be honest, no, I've read widely and extensively, but I've read very, very, very few self-help books or how-to books or that kind of thing. I'm sure there are good books out there. And you know, the thing is, because I became such a generalist, I will confess very honestly and say that the kind of specialized knowledge that is required in any one subject, whether it's education, whether it's leadership training, whether anything else, I wouldn't claim to have. So let me not recommend a specific book, but let me say that whenever you, as an individual, you're yourself an education leader, when you come across a book that you read, and it sets off a sort of spark in your brain, and you say with a flash of epiphany, boy, that was an insight that corresponds with what I've experienced, then you got your answer. Because in very many ways, what does reading teach us? It helps us often to recognize something that we may have instinctively understood but not formulated in words or thoughts. Or that we may have had a glimmer of an understanding of, but it had not really struck us with clarity until seeing it in somebody else's words and thinking. That's what one of the great things that reading is able to impart. So my genuine advice to you would be, and that applies to all principles as well, you know from your own experience many things. Sometimes you're too busy or haven't had the time in dealing with the trees, as it were, to see the wood, to see the forest. You're busy with the individual trees and leaves and grass and fruit. So my answer to you would be, read from those who've thought about this professionally, pedagogical books, books on education, leadership, whatever it may be. And when you read them, look out only for what you recognize as an insight. You're not ever going to learn anything meaningful from experiences that you have not, at some level, intuitive, instinctive, experiential, actually had yourself. But you will often find that somebody may be writing something from a totally different background, country, context, whatever, but it will set off a flash in your mind. Because you'll correlate it instinctively to something you yourself have done. Those are the insights that, to my mind, are the most valuable for you and going forward to those who want it. Thank you.
So you've worn many hats, diplomat, author, parliamentarian, all of that. So looking back, what sort of failures do you think have shaped you to become who you are?
You know, first of all, I think failure is an essential part of that. And I genuinely don't believe that anyone who has succeeded all the time. I don't believe that any of the big successes we see around us were not enabled by the experience of setbacks and failures. Some people are better at conceiving those than others, and some people prefer to conceive them. I have been pretty open about everything myself. And the one thing perhaps, the one aspect of the simulation I've had in the duty office, I grew up in an era where you never tried to show the effort. So that's something which is part of a certain culture of behavior, where, you know, you study hard for your exam and you come with an unfurrowed brow and a smile on your face. And no one knew you'd not well in the work. Or you would be suffering either great pain or distress, or you would be enjoying great pleasure and joy, but you are trained not to. Because essentially there's an aspect of polite courteous behavior that's now outstanding. But there was an era where people didn't show their success, didn't show their tragedy. Somebody would be going through some horror at home, but they would not be talking about it. Today is a very different world. Today, we bear all our emotions on our sleeves, we show them, we talk to them, etc., etc. But that was a different era. If you grow up in something, that's fine. So, very often, I feel that people resent my seeming effortlessness of doing something. But that's not because I haven't get the effort, because I haven't shown the effort. But it's there. I've never succeeded in anything without hard work, homework, preparation, putting in the slog, etc. So that's a different matter. But on the question that you asked about, remind me how you phrase it, sorry, I got gathered.
You're wearing many hats. You worn many hats. Were there any failures that
Failures, yeah. So the thing about failures is, when they happen, the only thing that matters is what you learn from it. Because for everyone must have been failure, small or big, there will be failure. And one obvious thing is that if you were responsible for the failure, that is, if something you did you could have done better or done differently, that's the first lesson we all learn, that you would actually then decide not to do the same thing again, right? The second kind of failure is one where circumstances conspire against you, where you did everything right or the best way you could, and yet other things happen. Now, there you have to find your consolation in a couple of other approaches. In my case, for example, I ran for the second division before you ended. And I had by far the best credentials, as it were, in terms of familiarity with all the aspects of the UN's work that a second division should have. And I still lost. I came a close second out of 7 contenders. I got more votes than the sitting president, and the foreign minister, and prime minister. But I still lost. And that loss, ultimately, I lived with it. I lost because ultimately, this is not a job about the best resume. It's a job about the political equations in the world at the time, particularly the 5 member Security Council. And I knew that, obviously, as somebody who got up in the UN system, so I shouldn't have been surprised. But once it happened, it happened. I realized that the lesson that I found most valuable to me was the timeless teachings of Bhagavad Gita, which said basically you do the right thing irrespective of him. And you know, do the right thing, do the thing right, do the best you can, and you have done the best I could. I had ticked every box that I could have. And at the same time, there was some boxes like simply could be ticked, they were beyond my control. And the outcome was what it was. And the ultimate yardstick for me was, if I have done everything I could have, then the outcome was beyond it's not in my hands, and I should accept the outcome and move on. So that is an old philosophy. It's an old philosophy, but I think it's one that actually has timelessly stood the test of wisdom, because it's in my view the best. I've had other setbacks. I had to resign from my ministership within 1 year of coming to office the first time, for various reasons that I knew were grossly unjust and unfair and unwarranted. But instead of just allowing me to dishearten me and prompting me to quit or whatever altogether, I stayed on. I used the opportunity it gave me concentrate on my constituency and become a very good constituency, which I might not otherwise have ever found the time to do in the very demanding industry. And I bounced back eventually. And I think the answer to all of that comes from, again, in the sense, perhaps it's a very Hindu sense. I mean, I've read and resented these Western ideas of Hindu fatalism. But the truth is, it's not really fatalism. It's the art of acceptance. It is knowing that those things you can change, you do your best to change. And those things you can't change, you have no choice but to accept. And then build on that failure that you have to accept. And that, I think, is a quality that many of our sages have taught us over the centuries. And I have.
Thank you, sir. So I think Gita is one book everyone should read, regardless of.
Correct. And actually, not just Gita. I'm a huge fan of the Mahabharata generally. You were kind enough to mention in that slide my novel, The Great Indian Novel, which is actually my first novel, and is now just coming out in a few weeks in its 50th reprint. So that's actually, for me as a writer, it's very gratifying that young people who weren't born when the book first came out come clutching copies of it for signature, and that makes me feel that, to write something that has endured and lasted like that is of its own satisfaction. But the Mahabharata was a satirical retelling. I mean, the Great Indian Novel was a satirical retelling of the Mahabharata as a tale of 20th century India, of the freedom struggle and so on. And writing it required, of course, reading various translations of it. And one of the things that struck me is, in fact, you can see there, writing the novel was asking myself, why did we stop retelling the story? Why was it that from 400 BC to 400 AD, versions of the Mahabharata kept being told and retold and suddenly died out, So the novel's conceit was what would happen if a 20th century retired politician was telling the story of his era in the same way. And that was what we did in the novel, but it was a satirical novel. But in the process it struck me that this is something every Indian ought to read. It's not a religious epic, so people who are not Hindu don't have to worry about whether it's going to, although the Gita has been incorporated into it, and so very vital Hindu text is part of it. But the story of the Mahabharata itself is an extraordinary story, full of all sorts of great sort of adventures and misadventures, characters full of fatal play, of lust and greed and jealousy and avarice and betrayal and all of those things, while at the same time great noble ideas, visions, philosophies are also done. It's extraordinary, and for 800 years, every worthwhile story to be told was incorporated into a retelling of the Mahabharata as it was. So much so that a scholar once called it the National Library of India at that period. Why don't we encourage people to read much more? When I published the Great Indian Novel, I gave an interview saying that I felt that this should be taught to every school child. Just as we learn some of the great texts from other cultures and civilizations. Why don't we teach this? And to this day, 36 years later, it disappoints me that it's not that widely available. The medium of instruction doesn't matter. Teach them Mahabharata in English and make it available in English. The whole point is that English as a language, as I wrote again a couple of weeks ago in my column in the Express, English is a very useful language. It connects us to each other, to the rest of the world, and so on. But it doesn't need to disconnect us from ourselves, from our own heritage. And fortunately, our heritage is available in English. Never forget, Swami Vivekananda did the bulk of his preaching in English. So let us, for God's sake, use the language without any embarrassment about it. But let us not let it distance ourselves from all that we cherish in our own civilization.
So you are a role model for many of us. Who are your role models when growing up, and why?
Well, they keep changing, and I think I would encourage everybody to have many role models. Because as I said, you can only be the best you can't be somebody else. That role is already taken by that somebody else. So one role model is not a good idea because you can't really be him or her. You can only be you. But what you can do is imbibe from different role models certain qualities that you have. So certainly as a child, and to this day, my father was in many ways a role model. Even though I could see his limitations and flaws, I saw the strengths and qualities in him that I valued greatly, that I wanted to cherish. In terms of political ideas, values, and so on, the more I read, the more I admired Jawaharlal Nehru. He even though I disagreed with him on some policies. And so when I wrote my biography on him, and I was critical of certain things, my admiration was unstated for the mind and the vision, the breadth that he brought into it. In my working life at the UN, I became a huge admirer of Kofi Annan. I worked, privilege of working very, very closely with him. He first, I knew him as a colleague, but at one of many colleagues. And then he came into the peacekeeping department. I was already there, and we became close. At that point, we were the only two people of color in that very small, very Western, very white department. And subsequently, and we found we had a lot that we responded to similarly. And then when he became the undersecretary for peacekeeping, my then boss wanted to take me with him to his new department. And Kofi managed to persuade me to stay. And I'll never regret that because he really was somebody who taught me the value that, everybody recruits themselves. Everybody wants an assistant who's just like that. You actually need to understand that the reason I value you is because you're not like me. Because you have strengths I don't have, and I have strengths you don't have. So we can learn from each other. It was a tremendous approach from my boss, and I really felt that it stood me in very good stead. And also him as a human being, I admire very much. And he's one of these extraordinary people who's rather like an Indian yogi, but very deeply anchored in himself, unswayed by all the kind of, the job like Secretary General of the UN, which he became later, and where I was able to play a significant part in that sense. Kofi was somebody who was under all sorts of pressures at various times, and didn't allow himself to sway that. There was one period when he was under a bitter attack from some very powerful countries. When he internalized it so much, that he literally lost his voice. And there were days when literally no sound would come because he was taken on the pace. But I saw that strength, that inner strength, as an amazing attribute. That's something that one could cherish and learn from. So all these different people gave me different policies. And I would say the purpose of a role model is often to inspire you, that is, you see in them qualities, talents that you realize either you lack and you want to acquire, or you have and you want to polish in a direction that you see at its best in the other person. The other thing you learn from a role model, I think, is how to handle situations. So that person may look, especially most role models are older than us. That's why there are models. So they're older, they've had more experiences, and they're going through different experiences. We watch closely so we can learn when our time comes that we remember this is how he handled this, or she handled this, and he can do the same. So all of those qualities, I think, are very important. So we should all always look to others for inspiration, guidance, and lessons. But we should also look to them for sometimes what not to do. And the cautionary aspect of the role model is also something that can be very, very important. If somebody we respect did something badly or wrongly or disastrously, learning from that too can be part of our learning.
How has your personal success changed over the years? How has it evolved? What kind of levels of success do you imagine yourself achieving?
No, unfortunately, I have chosen professions where success is not entirely in my hands. So I don't actually go around thinking of success. I think of doing the best I can with whatever I've set myself to do. But one of my professions, as a politician, in a parliamentary system, one is dependent very much on, first of all, one's party, and secondly, one's institutions, that being the government, and above all, the public and the votes, so that even if you think you can make a big difference to the country, unless you belong to a party that gets enough seats in parliament to form the government, and unless that party entrusts you with a vote, you can make a difference. You may never get a chance to do so. So what's the point of sitting and fantasizing about what kind of parliament is going to be or what kind of if you can't be consistent in what you're in. And so I've never had any silly fantasies about positions or about particular achievements. I can only be responsible for what's in my control. What's in my control is how hard I work, how well I write, how well I speak, how much effort I put into something, and of course the goals I can achieve. So the satisfaction is actually those are the yardsticks you get in daily feedback. If a speech falls flat or an event goes bad, you'll know immediately or very soon. Similarly, if something you've done has succeeded, has impacted. And one advantage of being in public office, I literally get daily feedback. And one of the things that keeps me going, because there's an awful lot of hate out there, a lot of criticism, a lot of nastiness, is the amount of spontaneous goodwill that comes to me from strangers. And, you know, whenever I'm in a public place, I'm catching a flight or going out to, some places strangers can come up to me. I'm so gratified to know that I seem to have touched their lives or inspired them in some way. And that keeps me going. So ultimately, those are the things I'm looking for in terms of positive rating. It can't be achieving a particular position and let alone, I'm not in business, it can't be about a profit margin or $1 million in the bank. Those have never been my motivation. So it's do the best you can and you get feedback that what you've done has had an impact. Yeah.
Hypothetically, you were to become a principal of a school. One day, how would your day, month, and year look like?
Look, I tell you, I mean, when we were in school, the big objective was never to be summoned by the principal. Never do anything that brings you to the principal.
What's an advice you get? You can follow up with everything.
I think honestly, I would be presumptuous of me to give advice on a profession that I've never actually held myself. I have a lot of respect for. I mean, you have a very important task because you're both responsible for shaping the minds of your students and ultimately their direction, and guiding the teachers as well as running the administration. It's a three-cornered task, and not, I'm sure, the easiest. And there may be challenges on all three fronts at any given time. All I would say is, as far as possible, to never let your own frustration show and to not let them demoralize you. There will be no day, no life, or no career in which you're perfectly happy every day all the time. But deal with your own failures just as you deal with your own successes. Put aside your frustrations. And remember, ultimately, there is no greater responsibility than a responsibility for the well-being of others. If the children whom you are shaping through some of your decisions go on to achieve greater things than you ever had, that should be a source of pride and satisfaction. If the teachers are motivated to bring out the best in students who will again be great achievers, that's a great achievement for you. And if you run the administration efficiently so the school doesn't find itself suffering because you took bad decisions as a manager, that too. You've got to be all of these things. You got to be a manager, a motivator, a minder, a guide, everything. And I know that it's no one can be Superman, Superwoman, and yet that's what we expect to do. But I think the responsibility brings with it its own satisfaction. So I wish you all great luck and success. It's a wonderful job. We'll have to play traffic police. Who gets to us? We'll have to stop at 4 or 5 because I actually have come back. Sure.
Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful discussion filled with insightful discourses on life and leadership. And if I may add, as a teacher of English, you are the role model for our students in terms of your eloquent speech, your wit, your wisdom. So we talk about you most of the time in our classes. So we remember you fondly, sir. We request Dr. Tharoor, MD sir and ED sir, to unveil the 9th edition of the Goenka Gazette. This magazine is a beautiful chronicle of the events and milestones achieved in the GD Goenka group of schools. Let's have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the Goenka Gazette. also request Dr. Tharoor to felicitate Dr. Manvi Arora, Chief Compliance Officer, in recognition of her exemplary contributions and unwavering commitment contributing to GD Goenka University achieving NAC A+ accreditation. Let's have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Dr. Manvi Arora.
डॉक्यूमेंट भेज हाँ कैसे होगा एचडीएम भेजना वैसे है तो मार्केटिंग छुट्टी
Thank you so much. Do we have a question from?
May I request our next speaker, Dr. Manu Kapoor, to come on stage to present his book to Dr. Shashi, please.
Let's have a round of applause for Professor Manu Kapoor, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. I think since our chief guest, Dr. Tharoor, has to leave for the parliament session, can we have just 2 questions from the audience? Okay, Mr. Madhukar Jha, Principal of Patna School.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
First of all, like any other principal of the group.
You can hold the mic a little higher.
So, I'm a big fan of yours. Keep following you.
Thank you.
Sir, आप सरस्वती के बहुत बड़े उपासक हैं. This is evident. My question is that you have gone through the Mahabharata in quite detail. Who's your favorite character in Mahabharata?
I'm not going to play that game. Please, sir. I'm going to be really mischievous and say Vedyas, because obviously he not only writes it, but he also dictates it to be accurate, but he also is a participant in crucial moments. So I love that concept of a narrator who goes in and out of the narrative, who's both a participant and a producer. So there's your answer.
Please, can we just...
We can take 2 more off. Days anyway.
Okay, all right, please. No,
Yeah, whoever has a mic.
anyone, both have
Yes, go
mics.
ahead.
Good morning, sir. So listening to you is something enormous job. Like really very
I'm
enormous.
not hearing you very
This
well.
would be louder, please.
So listening to you is not that easy because of your repertoire of your vocabulary. It's enormous. And when we listen to you, it is when things become limpid. We become rapacious, and I believe the right word for it is you are supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Now, sir, my question is, in an age of instant information and short attention span, how how can a young leader can develop that deep and lifelong love for the books?
That's a very good question to which I'm afraid the only answer is to instill the love of books very young and keep doing it. When parents ask me that their children don't want to read, or identify books only with schoolwork and homework and so on, and they never read for pleasure, I tell them they're actually missing out on a huge thing in their own life. So I asked one young mother, for example, so what does your son like? And she says, football. So I said, get him books on football. Maybe because he can't always play, the weather is not right, or the conditions aren't there, or they don't want to play, whatever. He can then delve into a book, read about the game, see pictures, read stars of the past, whatever. And through his passion for football, he might enjoy and discover a joy in reading. I don't know if it worked in that particular mother's case, but that's the kind of idea. The other thing I tell parents is, unless you set an example yourself, why should your child listen to you? Too many parents aren't reading. They'll come home and switch on the TV, and then they'll complain that children aren't reading. But I'm sorry, children are naturally emulators. So if they see their parents getting something out of a book, they want to do it too. I'm very proud that my kids and now their kids are readers, and that's something which I think has to be instilled young and instilled within the family. Certainly, teachers can encourage it. One of the things teachers could do, for example, is to set pleasurable reading assignments outside the normal, shall we say, textbooks. Even in a literature class, you're teaching classics, Shakespeare, Dickens, whatever. Let them read a contemporary novel and come back and talk about it. Unfortunately, it's no longer good to get them to write a report on the book, and they can go to AI and get it in 5 minutes. And then you never know whether they've read the book or not. What you can do is get them to come and talk to the class. Imagine if you've got 25 students in the class, you've got 25 weeks ahead of you. Let each week one student come back and talk about a book they've read, which is a pleasurable book, a book they've read for their own reading, not that perhaps is in the school curriculum at all. And let's see how that goes. But I mean, these are all ways in which you can encourage reading. There's no perfect way, but you're totally correct. When people argue with me that, but people are reading just as much as in your time, it's just that they're reading differently, they're reading on screens instead. The question that I push back at them is, what are they reading? If they're reading WhatsApp forwards, is that actually enhancing anything in their cognitive abilities, in their knowledge, but also there are studies now that have come out, by the way. I've read one or two of them. I don't have time to do the kind of in-depth reading you all. Studies have established that there is a genuine decline in the ability to engage with complex material. Right. Because books give you complex reading skills, and short WhatsApp forwards or emails or whatever it is don't, because ultimately they're giving you snippet-sized, bite-sized information.
So before, I think Radhika ma'am's thoughts resonate with yours.
I think my whole Vasantan's team who is sitting here is probably thinking the same thing that Bharti is thinking, because I exactly think of this. I have young children of my own, and when they do their reading time, I'm with my reading time with them, and I think that's what really helps.
Really?
And I think Mana has prescribed a wide array of reading storybooks, interesting storybooks from nursery onwards. So, answer, may I add something to what you just answered? What is your take on audiobooks?
Personally, I find it quicker to begin with to read text than to listen. So I am not an audiobook person myself. I've actually recorded an audiobook myself, of Inglorious Empire, and people who heard it seem to have enjoyed it. So it depends. In many Western societies, a lot of people drive themselves to work and have longish commutes. And for them, the audiobook actually, as a practical convenience, makes a lot of sense. They might not, therefore, be using those 40 minutes more productively than by focusing on the road, but keeping their ears and their brains attuned to what they're listening. But in India, very few people perhaps are in those situations. I don't know, if you're living in Delhi and going to Gurgaon or vice versa, it may be a different story. But yeah, you can do that. I'm not a fan of an audio book when you could be reading. I mean, if you're on a train journey or you're just sitting at home, buy an audio book. But if you're doing something like, say, walking or exercising or driving, that may be a good use of your mind. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, sir. The next question, please. She's been waiting for a long time.
Good morning, everybody. It's an absolute honor to be here with you, listening to you. I think I was absolutely mesmerized, not just with your vocabulary, but also with your depth of knowledge, your genuineness, and your humility. So, you've represented India at many international forums. You've been a bureaucrat, a diplomat, and almost Secretary General of the UN, if I could say that. My question is that with your plethora of knowledge, with your ability to debate on any topic under the sun, with your in-depth understanding of the Eastern and the Western culture, especially Hindu culture, Hindu religion, and with your grandiloquent style of speaking, what is the reaction of the native English speakers and the Western world to an Indian, standing in front of them and speaking with so much of confidence and so much of knowledge base? I'm really, really curious to know, sir. I'm sure they are overwhelmed, they are overawed, but I really want to hear it from you.
No, listen, I think you can't generalize about the various people have various reactions.
Has it opened more doors for you?
I don't know, to be honest, because I already got more doors open than I can go through. But I will say that one thing that I was gratified by when I published my colonialism book in England was the receptivity. Because, for the longest time, the British had been patting themselves in the back that their colonial enterprise was a great thing and how they did such a favor to the world by ruling us. And when I sort of gave them a pushback and explained to the world in their language, that wasn't exactly the truth. The fact that they were winning, of course, there is a certain percentage, but a mercifully small percentage that resented and rejected what I had to say. But the vast majority, I felt this opened their eyes and said so. I remember a conservative peer in the House of Lords writing, and he used to have a column in the London Times, and he wrote an entire column raising a book and making the observation that he wondered how Indians were willing to speak to the British after what they had done. So I met him personally, and we had lunch together, and I said, I was a bit surprised to see a Tory peer saying all of this. And he said, no, I'm a true conservative, because in my ideology, my philosophy, we should have traded with you, not conquered you. So that, in some ways, was another perspective that had not occurred to me, and one which I rather valued. Similarly, others said, and I've often been in talks where some embarrassed-looking Englishman has come up to me and either said or sent me a note, 3 or 4 notes that say, I know it's too late, but I want to apologize on behalf of my people for what we did to you.
That answers my question. Thank you so much.
On a lighter note, in 2013, Gautam Gambhir was your favorite cricketer. And I know you're a big cricket fan. Who is your current fan and why?
With any sport, I think you should have enthusiasm depending on current performance. So I've gone through my Gavaskar phase. I've gone through a couple day phase. I've gone through a Yuru Sehwag phase, a Gambhir phase, etc. I've had a lot to think positively about Shubman Gill, but not recently. Where he's displaced my hometown boy, Sanju Samson, from the team, and performed much worse. So Sanju had 3 centuries as an opening batsman, T20. Shubman is struggling to pass 20 in a dozen innings. But he's got the place because he's who he is, and Sanju is out, and I obviously have my problems with that.
So you had graciously offered to host yesterday's match in the
Yeah, I mean, playing cricket in North India in the winter is no longer a serious option. People can see the ball in this absurd fog of yours. And driving here, we can hardly see the car in front of us. So
we were quick to see your comment about the match being played there.
I said play in Thiruvananthapuram, the AQI is 68, not 400.
What do you think he gets to be on board?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of
Why should we wait for him to turn 50?
We don't have to wait for him. I can tell you, I've written about this. New Year's Eve of 1988, I was at a party where Sunil Gavaskar told me about this 14-year-old kid who he said was going to be the next great player for India, Sachin Tendulkar. And sure enough, we picked it the following year, possibly because people like Gavaskar thought so. And he debuted for India at 16, right? I mean, here I was hearing about a 14-year-old kid, but with Vaibhav Suryavanshi, we have a 14-year-old who's already, and in every forum, done the most amazing things. Why do we need to wait?
Yes,
Let's go for it. But let's also not forget child prodigies and disappointed us before. And there are two sad examples, one which I hope can still be rehabilitated. The first one is Vinod Gandhi, who was such a great cricketer. He scored 2 back-to-back double centuries, no one has done that before. And who unfortunately was lost to alcohol and booze and partying and his life went down too. Prithvi Shaw was the other one. Broke every record in school cricket and made a century at Test debuts and again went down. So, temperament is often as important as human being as talent. But he seems now to have pulled his act together and seems to be having a serious stab in a second attempt. I hope that
Is there any law? Is there any law? Is there any law in BCCI that you can't enter at 14?
No, in fact, Pakistan actually holds a record, but no one trusts Pakistani police as well. There's a guy called Hassan Raza who made his test debut at 14. He did not have a great career, but then he didn't have the kind of performances that Suryavanshi has had by the age of 14 or so. We have to see. But certainly, I'm a great believer in the prospects of bright young talent spotted early, but also groomed in terms of their temperament. Because imagine you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old, you're getting these millions of rupees, far more than your father has ever earned, and it's yours and you've earned it, and you think you're the king of the world, and then you start not listening to anybody who's giving you advice, and you end up doing all this stuff. It shows us such a cautionary tale, because the kid really had so much fun. Anyway, before we turn this into a cricket commentary, I want to thank you all for being such a great audience.
Standing ovation for Dr. Shashi Tharoor.